talking about the soil types. And I find sometimes that maybe not on a macro level, but in your own little area where you're hunting, where is the soil the best? Because oftentimes that's where the best vegetation is. And so those bucks are going to key in on that. And what I find is sometimes the biggest bucks are in those better soiled areas, even in my WMA. If I go to areas that maybe are rockier, maybe it's not quite as good, I'm finding that antler potential is not as good as it is where those better soils are in the summertime. And some of those places, they're as good as a food plot for sure.
The challenging thing about early season, and I'd love for us to kind of discuss this, is like you said, the deer, it's a double-edged sword. The bucks aren't moving a whole bunch. They're in a core area, so when you find them, you're right there on top of them. On the flip side, you could be a couple hundred yards off that area that deer is really using on the edge of his little home range, and you may never even think he doesn't even exist to you because you don't never have him on camera because he's not traveling very far. He's got his food, water, cover all pretty tight. He's not having to move a whole bunch. Walk us through your thought process specifically on covering enough ground, especially with trail cameras, but looking for sign or just trying to cut tracks, whatever you're trying to do, in order to find those small pockets that these mature bucks are wanting to use versus randomly throwing cameras out there to the wind and just seeing what happens. Because, again, the deer aren't moving a whole bunch, and you could be off just a couple hundred yards and never even know that deer was there.
I mean, I've been doing this for a few years now, so I tend to have a lot more knowledge of bucks in my area, but, it took time to build that up. When I was listening to Lance Mathers the other week, I kind of do stuff similar. He talked about going down, the creek drainages and finding those crossings and stuff. I mean, if I'm a guy that's going out there getting started, I'm going to probably look for stuff like that. It's maybe a long linear type of feature where I can drop cameras and then start seeing, whether that's bucks crossing the top of the mountain or crossing a creek. It could be road crossings even. Sometimes it's just easy to go down a road if it goes through good habitat and set them up and see what's coming back and forth. And then you can build off of that, just like he talked about, you back off of that and then start clustering your cameras to start finding them. But over time, as you learn your area, I spend, my wife says, way too much time in the mountains, but even through turkey seasons, and I like to mushroom hunt and do all that kind of stuff too. So as you're spending time out there, one thing we didn't talk about last time is, and it's interesting, you guys were talking about this a little bit on your podcast from yesterday. They were talking about the soil types. And I find sometimes that maybe not on a macro level, but in your own little area where you're hunting, where is the soil the best? Because oftentimes that's where the best vegetation is. And so those bucks are going to key in on that. And what I find is sometimes the biggest bucks are in those better soiled areas, even in my WMA. If I go to areas that maybe are rockier, maybe it's not quite as good, I'm finding that antler potential is not as good as it is where those better soils are in the summertime. And some of those places, man, they're as good as a food plot for sure. I mean, they can be just as good. I mean, you look at the plant species that are in there and you start, I've done some research on them. You'll see that those plants are just as good as beans and other food plants that are put out there. So those are kind of micro things that you learn along the way. I don't know if that'd be the first thing I'd look for, but I'm always keeping my eye out for those types of things. And then when I find that, I'm going to say, okay, well, there's another area that looks just like that or has that same type of habitat. So I'm going to go check that one out. So I might drop some cameras there and try to figure this out. So it really becomes about a system over time of building on what you learned the year before and keep building on that. I feel like now I've been doing this probably about 6 years now. I have a good system built. Like this year, I have more big deer on camera than I ever had. I mean, it's actually kind of difficult to figure out which deer I want to target right now because I have new ones keep popping up a little bit here and there. And so it's just, I think just focusing on those long linear terrain features possible, if you have a long ridge and you've got drainages coming up and you can find those trails where they're crossing the top or run those things. And if the habitat looks good, look for it. I mean, or drop some cameras in there and see what is available for the deer in there, and then see what's running around in there. Sometimes you just get lucky. I'll be honest, in the mountains, sometimes you just you don't think something's there, and you find out there it is. So
when it comes to the soil, by the way, that's something that I've actually used before. And OnX Maps has a soil layer on their elite membership, where if you're an elite member at OnX, you can use the promo code Southern for a 20% discount, by the way. You can go on there and you can click that layer on, and it'll actually break down the soil types. And I was actually looking at this for my hunting club yesterday, and some of the better soil around our area. Some of it's cultivated, but some of it's not. But sure enough, it lines up with where the best bucks that we're getting on camera are either hanging out like right there in that soil, like good soil region, or they're directly adjacent to it. And kind of like you're saying, the same type of plant could be growing over here in this poor quality soil, and then a couple 100 yards away in some high quality soil. It could be the same exact plant, like say it's like poke salad or something, but the one in the good quality soil is going to be more attractive to the deer. It's going to have more nutrients in it, which they can tell. And so they're going to gravitate more towards that stuff, especially, right now, this kind of late summer time frame, getting ready to head into fall. Down here, the acorns aren't quite dropping yet, but I'd imagine it's probably even the same with oak trees. Those oaks that are in those high quality soil areas are probably going to produce more and better mast than oaks that are in a poor quality soil. So OnX has that layer. There's also a lot of other layers that you can look at online. You can just Google, like soil map, and there's going to be stuff from like USGS that you can go look at that's going to be pretty fine tuned to your area. There's going to be big macro views of like the whole state, but there's also going to be GIS maps online for free, provided by the government, that you can go and look at that are going to be on more of a micro scale, where to the point of like if you have a 10-acre soybean field down the road and it's like the only field, it's going to catch that, and it's going to show you even that just little 10-acre area. So there's really good data sets out there to look at that kind of thing. Now, I want to go back to the linear feature thing. I want to dive down that rabbit hole a little bit. In your area, you're in West Virginia, you're in the mountains, and you're in pretty big woods country. When we had you on before, you mentioned that there are some clear cuts in your area, not a ton of them. But real quick, can you go through maybe the list of like some of those linear features? I know you already mentioned roads and things like that, but I'm curious on if there are any more interior edges that you're ever looking at, like maybe the edge of a clear cut or just timber changes. Like, are you looking for habitat edges, or are you just looking for like big linear features like creeks, roads, and ridge lines?
Yeah, I mean, we live in this area here is, I told you before, it's a ridge and valley system. So our mountains are a little bit different. It's like super long north-south type mountains that run for miles. And it's usually just like one long ridge, and it'll have drainages coming off of it. But you might have two or three of those ridges paralleling each other in a span or whatever. So a lot of our stuff, it's just a up and over the mountain type of thing. It's not endless mountains like some other areas are. So that's why I say the linear features really work well for us, because when you have a long mountain ridge, it runs for a long way. We have a lot of roads on top of our mountains that we can walk and stuff, so you can pick up those trails and stuff. As far as the clear cuts, yes, I have put stuff around them. Our cuts are not super big that have been done. They might be 20 acres, 30 acres at the most, so they're not gigantic. But yes, I have run cameras along those, and in the summertime, especially, you'll see those bucks moving up and down the edges of those, especially if it's in conjunction with something else, maybe like a crossing across the road or something like that. They are using that. So yes, I have looked at those. They're not in every part that I hunt, so some areas have it, some areas don't. And some of those cuts, again, going back to the soil, some of them are better than others. Some produce really good vegetation that is good to eat. Other stuff, they cut it and it just grows a bunch of mountain laurel back, and the deer really don't want to eat that stuff. So, it just depends where it's at and how it's located. But yes, I do use those from time to time to try to locate those bucks too, for sure.
Okay. Now, Jacob's trying to get in on me
Oh,
here.
I want you to ask the question. I thought you were going to do it, but you didn't.
What question?
Specifically on the soil types and like the quality of soil. Like, where do you find that in your area, Chad? Like, is there any commonalities? Is it something you see on a map, or is it just covering ground? You just notice it based off how like the actual soil looks in certain areas of the mountains.
Yeah, there's pretty noticeably a couple of different areas. It seems like certain mountaintop areas have it better than others, and then there's obviously down around creeks sometimes it seems like there'll be better soil in certain areas around the creeks or whatever. Um, those are probably the two main things when it comes to soil, because we have a lot of rocks. I think we grow rocks up there, so there's a lot of that. Um, so when you got a lot of rocks and stuff, it becomes pretty easy to see what's growing well and what's not. I mean, this time of year, especially, you walk through, you're going to see all the green on the ground. It's pretty noticeable. But yeah, I mean, most of it's the tops of the mountains in places, and down around creeks is where I'd say the vast majority of it is better.